So we're in a sermon series. We've been in for a little while now. We're going to there's only one more week of this sermon series, and then we're going to take a little break, and we're going to do some preparation for Easter. It's going to be similar, looking at the book of Luke, the things that Jesus did leading up to the cross, and what he did on the cross, and what he did in rising from the dead on Easter morning. So this week and next week, and then we'll move into that. The sermon series we're in right now, get to know what Jesus really taught. And I've had up on the screen for you, every single week I've had this picture that's the background to most of the pictures, most of the slides and the PowerPoint. And it's this picture of a guy coming out of a tunnel, a dark tunnel into the light. I don't know, have you even noticed that picture? You've probably seen it. If you've been coming to church, you've probably seen it like 200 times. How many of you have noticed it? How many of you thought about it at all? All right, a couple of you, that's good. So today I'm actually going to explain why I have that picture, and maybe it's obvious to some of you. So Jesus' teaching brings us into the light. It is like you were walking around in the dark all your life, and then when Jesus' teaching grabs a hold of you and you understand what it really is, what it's really saying, it's like coming out into the light and seeing the world for the first time. Seeing the world as it really is. Seeing life as it really is. The title of the message today is Lighting the Fire Inside You. And we're carrying on from the last couple weeks. We've been in Luke. This is a book that was written by eyewitness accounts that were compiled by a guy named Luke. Eyewitness accounts of Jesus, what he did and what he taught. And we're looking at the things he taught. We're in Luke chapter 11. And we're finishing up that chapter this week. So this is carrying on from last week, lighting the fire that is inside of you. Now, how many of you, if someone told you there's something you could do, one thing that you could do, and if you did this thing, everything in your life, it wouldn't matter if you sometimes went the wrong way or made the wrong choice. If you did this one thing, everything in your life would eventually turn out okay. This one thing, if you did it, it would keep you on track. How many of you would want to then do that one thing? Everyone, right? If there were one thing you could do that would keep you on track, no matter what storms came in your life, no matter what confusions, sometimes life can be very, very confusing. Nod your head and say, if you agree with that. Life can be very, very confusing. Jesus is going to give a teaching in this section that is about one thing, lighting the fire that is inside of you. One thing that you can do that will keep you on track and keep you from going the wrong way. Lighting the fire that is inside of you. I'm going to give you the main point up front, but I'll tell you this ahead of time. I used a lot of colors this week, so I kind of went color crazy. So if you guys like colors in the text, you're going to love it this week. If you don't, you find it hard to see, you're going to come and complain afterwards. So go ahead, that's fine. And so I went color crazy this week, and I'm going to give you the main point of the message right up front, but don't worry about writing it all down. The main point this week is really long. Okay? And so we're going to focus on the first part of the main point here, and we'll come back to it at the end of the message. So here's the main point of the text, not my main point. I think the main point of what Jesus is trying to get across to us in the end of Luke chapter 11. You must direct your time and energy at truly knowing God, changing on the inside, and joining in his mission, the mission Jesus is on. So what I want you to focus on in this part is you must direct your time and energy. So write that in. You guys have all got a bulletin. Is everybody, let me see if you got a bulletin. Hold that thing high. Yes. All right, so you're going to need that bulletin in a little while as part of a little sermon, a little message demonstration. So make sure you've got a bulletin. If not, the ushers might have more. So make sure you got that, and you got something to write in that bulletin on. So here's how we're going to go through this thing today. There's 3 sections to this teaching. The first is called the sign of Jonah. All right, so we're going to read it in just a minute. It's starting at Luke chapter 11 and starting at verse 29. So in this section, Jesus is going to be continuing on his teaching from last week, and I'll remind you of that in just a minute. So continuing on his teaching that we went over last week, talking about people who really can't see what's right in front of them. What's obvious right in front of them. They can't see it at all. And he's trying to help these people. And then moving on from there, he's going to give them a sign. And moving on from there, he goes into this section that I'm going to call lighting the fire. And this is where he talks about that there is something inside of you that can be lit or turned on, a kind of light or fire. And if you turn that on, everything is going to, if that's on, you'll be able to see clearly on the inside. And everything in the end will turn out okay for you because you'll be able to keep going in the right direction. And then in the third section, Jesus moves into what is in the book of Luke, his strongest rebuke to certain groups of people. Now, what is a rebuke? That's when you tell somebody that they're doing something wrong. This is the section where it's called the woes to the Pharisees. Woe to you because of this, and woe to you because of that. It's actually Jesus issuing a bunch of warnings about particular things that these religious leaders and teachers are doing. And we're going to talk about that, and that's where the rubber's going to hit the road. Okay? Like happens often, Jesus' teachings are going to seem kind of, okay, yeah, I could agree with that. And then when he starts to give particular examples of what he means, it's gonna hit you. It maybe even is gonna, jab you a little bit like a knife. Okay, so let's go into it here. Remember what we talked about last week. Last week it was this section where Jesus had said in Luke 11:23, "Whoever is not with me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters." And we talked about how he was describing three groups of people that were all in the crowd in front of him. And you remember what those groups of people were? First there were the opponents, right? And I won't have you say Beelzebul this week. Just give me a boo. Just put your hand up and say boo if you're they had the opponents. People who knew that Jesus was who he says he is, but their reaction was to be against him because they didn't want to do the things he was teaching. Okay, and then who did we have next? The undecided, right? There was a group of people in the crowd who really knew that Jesus was who he says he is, but they were pretending like they didn't know. I'm not sure yet. Can you give us some kind of sign, Jesus? Even though he's given sign after sign after sign. And so the undecided say, huh? Or, I don't know. Man, you guys are not awake today. That's okay. Okay, maybe I'll try to bring more energy so we can kind of wake you up. All right. And then in the last crowd were the fans. These people were in the crowd and they were saying, Jesus, 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 he's the best. But they weren't actually doing any of the things he was saying. They were cheering for him but not following him. So give me a cheering for Jesus if you're in this side. Okay, yeah, pretty good, pretty good. Well done. I like that. Okay. So let's go into what he says next, all right? So this is the very next section. So remember, he's just been talking about these people who were asking for a sign, the undecided people. They were asking for a sign even though they had seen sign after sign because they didn't really want to follow him. So now we're at verse 29. As the crowds increased, Jesus said, "This is a wicked generation. It asks for a sign, but none will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. For as Jonah was a sign to the Ninevites, so will the Son of Man be to this generation." There he's talking about himself. He calls himself the Son of Man. "The Queen of the South will rise at the judgment with the people of this generation and condemn them. For she came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom. And now something greater than Solomon is here. The men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and now something greater than Jonah is here." So you can see in this section he's carrying on the same teaching. He's referring to these same people who are saying, "I want to see a sign from you, Jesus. Show me another sign. Prove that you are the Son of God, that you really are who you say you are, and then I'll follow you." I knew somebody in college, a friend of mine, who said to me, we were doing a Bible study, he had seen the teachings of Jesus, he had seen Jesus transform the lives of people around him. And yet he said, I'll believe in God, I'll believe in Jesus. All he has to do is show up in front of me and do some amazing miracle right in front of my eyes, and then I'll believe in him. The truth is that if you won't believe when you see the Word of God, if you won't believe when you hear the preaching, if you won't believe when you see the wisdom that's in the teachings of the Bible, then you wouldn't believe even if God did an amazing miracle right in front of your face. And in fact, Jesus in this section, he sounds kind of harsh, doesn't he? He's saying to them, this generation is wicked, and it's not going to receive any sign. But actually, this chapter, this section, is showing us the mercy of God and the mercy of Jesus, isn't it? Because what sign does he say he's going to give them? I'm not going to give these people any sign. Well, really, he's giving them sign after sign, right? He's about to do a whole bunch more miracles. And then what sign is he ultimately going to give them? What is the sign of Jonah that he's talking about? That's where Jonah was in the belly of a fish for 3 days, right? And then he came back out of death in the belly of this fish. Jonah didn't actually die. But Jesus is talking about he's going to give them a sign where he actually comes back to life. He's going to die, and then on the third day, he's going to rise from the dead. There couldn't be any greater sign than this, could there? So even though he's saying this generation is wicked, it keeps asking for a sign, I'm not going to give them any more sign. What he's really saying is they can't see the signs that are already in front of them. But God in his mercy is going to give them the greatest sign they could ever be given, in the hopes that some of them would wake up. In the hopes that some of them would see, okay, this guy rose from the dead. He really must be who he says he is, and then they would follow. You see Jesus' mercy in this section? He's being very harsh. And as he is very harsh in this section, he's going to get more harsh as we move on. Remember that he's trying to help these people. He's going to attack the Pharisees in a few minutes. But 20 years down the road, many of these Pharisees, in fact, thousands and thousands of them, will become followers of Jesus. It just takes them a long time. And so Jesus is setting in motion here something that is really going to help them in the end. But what he's saying right now is that this whole generation that's in front of him is blind. It cannot see. Jesus does amazing things. They cannot see what's right in front of their eyes. And then he moves into the next teaching, which is how they could start to see. Jesus is going to go deep here and explain why they can't see what's right in front of them, and he's going to explain how they could change. Let's read that section. This section in your NIV Bible, it's going to be entitled The Lamp of the Body. I'm calling it Lighting the Fire, right? A lamp back then was not electrical, right? It was a fire that you would light. No one lights a lamp and puts it in a place where it will be hidden or under a bowl. Instead, Jesus says, they put it on its stand so that those who come in may see the light. Now, your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eyes are healthy, your whole body is full of light. But when they are unhealthy, your body is full of darkness. And this is a key verse here. See to it then that the light within you is not darkness. Therefore, if your whole body is full of light and no part of it dark, it will be just as full of light as when a lamp shines its light on you. So let's think about this teaching for a minute. What exactly is Jesus saying here? He's talking about some kind of light that's inside of you. And he's also talking about, when he says inside of you, Jesus doesn't mean literally inside your body, physically. He means inside of you in the sense of in your spirit, in your soul, in your mind, in the parts of you that are not physical. There is something that's like your eyes. And just like when your eyes are unhealthy, if you're blind, or if you just have them closed, you cannot see. You can't deal with reality effectively because you cannot see it effectively. Just like that, there's a light inside of you that can be turned off. And if it's off, you cannot deal with real life. You cannot actually even see what's real around you. You will misinterpret what's happening in the world around you. All right, now how many of you have been to a restaurant in Vancouver called The Dark Table? Oh yeah, if you've been there, say, oh yeah. The Dark Table is awesome. It's pretty sweet. If you're a teenager, it's sick or it's lit, although it's not lit, it's unlit, isn't it? Yeah. So the Dark Table is a restaurant in Vancouver. You should all go sometime. Maybe we should have a group activity there. And what it is you eat in complete darkness. Complete, total darkness. Like you cannot see your hand waving in front of your face. They've got the whole place blacked out, and there are blind people who are your waiters and waitresses. And so you are sort of entering, the idea is you're entering into the world of a blind person as you eat there. And it is an amazing experience. I would say my experience there is the first thing you find is it feels very oppressive. And then the second thing you find is it actually, in some ways, it connects you with the other people around you more after a little while. You start saying and doing weird things because no one can see you. It's almost like being on the internet. My brother-in-law, when he was there, we walked out of the place, and my brother-in-law, his hair was totally a mess, and he had been like rubbing his head all weird ways because no one could see him. Yeah, bizarre. So anyway, you should go to the Dark Table sometime, but we're going to try and just have a little tiny piece of the Dark Table right now. So what I want you to do, this is your demonstration portion, your example here. What I want you to do is get yourself a little comfortable, relaxed here, and then I want you to close your eyes. I'm going to ask everybody to do this. Close your eyes, and you're not going to open them until I say open them. I'm not going to do anything weird to you. Come on, close your eyes. Trust me. Nobody's going to come up and grab you. Got your eyes closed? Okay. Now the first thing I want you to do is find your bulletin. Don't open your eyes. Find your bulletin. Okay. Now some of you had it in your hand, so that's great. That was easy. Okay. Now, what I want you to do is hopefully, I didn't pass out pens, but I want you to find a pen or some kind of writing implement. Try and find that. You can dig through your purse if it's in there. Blind, you can do this. And then in just a minute, I want you to find the second point on the sermon notes. Keep your eyes closed. You got to do this for real. This is a challenge. You can show me later if you got this even close to right. And I'm going to give you the things to write in on that second point. You're going to try to write them in blind, all right? Okay, so let's do this. So the second point, go ahead and put it up on the board. Okay, so the second point here is that the fire inside you is, if the fire inside you is lit, you will see clearly and go the right way. So in the blanks, you're going to write inside you, lit, and clearly. All right? So you're trying to do this blind. I know not everybody has a pen, but you can do your best. Blind, you're going to write in the second point in the notes, you're going to write inside you, lit, and clearly. The whole sentence is, if the fire inside you is lit, you will see clearly and go the right way. Give you just a second to complete that task. Okay, everybody done? Open your eyes and see how you did. Of course you missed. I mean, if anybody even got it close to that line, give yourself a round of applause. That's very good. And you can come show me. I'd like to see what you got later. Hopefully you didn't ruin your notes here. Okay, what I want to get across here, if the fire, Jesus is saying that there is something, and he doesn't actually say what it is in this section. He is saying that there is something inside you that's like your eyes. And just like if you had your eyes open, that exercise would have been super easy, right? It's not even an exercise. You would just do it. Just like your eyes flood your body with light, the ability to see and deal with reality effectively. Just like that, there's something inside of you, in your soul. Actually, let's call this, so there's something in your spirit. Okay, we're going to use that word, meaning the deepest part of you. The part of you that chooses, the part of you that desires and wills things. In your spirit, there is something like your eye. And if that something is turned on, if it's lit, if it's on fire, if that fire inside you is burning, then you will be able to see clearly what reality is really like. And you will always end up going in, you won't make every right choice, but overall you will end up in the right place because you can see. Just like if I told you to go somewhere, I gave you directions, you might make a wrong turn, but if you can see clearly, you will eventually figure out how to get to where I'm telling you to go. But if you're blind and I give you directions somewhere, if you have your eyes closed and I tell you to walk somewhere, you're not going to get there, are you? You're going to crash into a snowbank and you're going to sink underneath. Well, yeah, it's going to be bad. Okay, so next we're going to move into the third section. And in this section, Jesus will, in a minute, explain what that thing is inside of you and how to light it. He had just said in verse 35, see to it that the light within you is not darkness. So notice that this is something you must do. He is telling you to do something to make sure that the light inside you is not darkness. And now in this final section of chapter 11, he's going to explain by way of example what exactly you need to do and what he's talking about, what this light is, what this fire is. Okay, so this section gets really long. I'm going to read the first part of it, and then we'll just talk about the second part of it, so it doesn't go too long and too detailed. I don't want us to look at the little pieces too much. I want us to see the big picture here. Verse 37, when Jesus had finished speaking, a Pharisee, this is a religious leader, invited him to eat with him. So he gets invited to dinner. And so he went and reclined at the table. That means he sits down at the dinner table. They used to lay down at tables. But the Pharisee was surprised when he noticed that Jesus did not first wash before the meal. That section is very important. Verse 39, then the Lord, that is Jesus, said to him, now then, you Pharisees, you clean the outside of a cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness. You foolish people, or maybe more emphatically we could translate that, you idiot. Did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? And then this is the key verse for understanding, I think, the whole chapter, though it is a very hard verse to understand. But now, as for what is inside you, be generous to the poor, and everything will be clean for you. I've translated it a little bit differently up here. But now give to God the things inside you, and everything will be clean for you. Let's go through this story. We're going to need to come back to it as we look at the particular things he says after it, as he rebukes the Pharisees and the teachers of the law piece by piece. This story is key to understanding it. Jesus goes to dinner with a religious leader. Now, the religious leaders always washed their hands before they ate. In fact, all of the Jewish people then always washed their hands before they ate a meal. Now, to us, what might be the reason that we would think they would wash their hands? Germs, right. They did not know anything about germs. You get that, right? And soap had not been invented yet. So they're washing their hands just with water, and they did not do it so that their hands would be clean from germs and they wouldn't get sick. That had never entered into any of their minds. The reason that they washed their hands was this was a sign of, it was a ritual cleansing to honor God. So it might be something like, for us, praying before a meal. Right? Most Christians today, I would say, pray before they eat. And it's a way of honoring God and saying to God, I recognize this food comes from you. I'm putting you first. You're the best. Okay, and then I'm going to eat my meal. So when the Pharisees, when the Jewish people are washing their hands, it's not to get rid of germs. It's to honor God. And Jesus walks in, and does Jesus know that all the Jewish people wash their hands every time before they eat? Yeah, he knows. He knows. And Jesus, therefore, intentionally does not wash his hands. And you see what this must have, what I want you to get into here is, what did this feel like to the religious leader? What would it feel like for some of us if you sat down with a pastor and he just started eating? Some of you would feel like he didn't pray before he ate. Only think of something stronger than that. This religious leader is actually not just surprised, but offended. He feels like Jesus has just dishonored God by not washing his hands, by not showing God a very basic sign of respect that everybody in their culture showed. He has dishonored God. And Jesus did it on purpose for a particular reason. Jesus then launches in to a lesson You think he didn't have this lesson prepared? He knew exactly what he was doing. He launches into a lesson at that moment. He says, you religious leaders, you're only paying attention to what's on the outside. You're majoring on things that are of little importance, and you have completely abandoned the things that are of most importance. And you can see then, as he says, you're foolish. You're cleaning the outside of a cup, which is not a bad thing to do. How many of you want the outside of a cup that you're about to drink from to be clean? Yes. But they're cleaning only the outside of the cup. They're spending all of their energy on the outside instead of cleaning the inside of the cup. How many of you would drink from a cup like that? You know about germs. You would never drink from a cup like that. Verse 41, I'm saying, is a key to this verse. So let's have that verse there if it's not. This verse is interesting. I've translated it again like this. Now, Jesus says, give to God. This is his instruction, and this is his answer to how do you light the fire that's inside of you? How do you light that lamp inside of you so that you see clearly and can understand reality properly? Give to God the things inside you, and everything will be clean for you. I've translated it like this because what Jesus says is very hard to translate. What he actually says is, give alms, okay? And what give alms is give money to the poor, right? This is something that was one of the most basic religious practices in those days. It's still one of our basic religious practices, isn't it? We honor God by giving money to him. We're going to do that a little bit later in the offering. And so the Jews were doing this all the time as one of their basic religious practices. But he says, give as alms, not money, but give as alms the stuff that's inside of you. Give as alms the stuff inside of you, and then everything will be clean for you. Clearly, he can't be talking about money, right? And clearly, he can't be talking about giving to poor people, can he? Because you can't give poor people the stuff that's inside of you. He's talking about giving it to God. He's saying that your energy, this is what we had at the beginning, your time and energy must be primarily focused on giving the things inside of you to God. Not that the other things are completely unimportant, but this is extremely important. Now let's go into, Jesus is now going to rebuke these Pharisees piece by piece. And so I got a slide up here that's this is a long section where he says, woe to you for this, and woe to you for this, and you're like unmarked graves, and you guys are really awful, and a bunch of bad stuff is going to happen to you. The word woe is also quite difficult to translate. The word that Jesus uses is uai. It's quite difficult to translate. We have the word woe, but that's kind of old English. We don't really say woe anymore unless it's a very different word than this, right? W-O-A-H or wow, right? But we don't have the word W-O-E. Let's click to the next slide with the list there. So what this word means is it's a warning. This word means something bad is about to happen to you. You're in extreme danger. Alas, this is an awful condition that you're in. It's the opposite of the word he uses in what we call the Beatitudes, the blessings. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the merciful. This is the opposite word. Woe to you because of this and this and this. And so here's what he says. In this section, he gives three pieces to each of two groups of people. One are the Pharisees and one are the teachers of the law. You can think of them all just as religious leaders. First, he says he has this woe about tithing versus actually loving God and doing what's right. So he says, woe to you Pharisees, because you give a tenth. That's what a tithe means. You give 10% of all this different stuff you have, all these spices, which were worth a lot of money back then, all these different things you have, but you don't put any energy into loving God, and you don't put energy into actually justice, doing what's right to the people around you. Now, these Pharisees had come up with elaborate systems. They had gone beyond simply just saying, we need to give 10% of what we have to God. They had spent a huge amount of time and energy saying, which things do we give to God? Which do we not give to God? In which circumstances do we not have to give to God? They had a whole bunch of rules. And Jesus is not actually weighing in on their rules here. He's not saying your rules were wrong or your rules were right. he's saying your energy is misplaced. Your focus is wrong. You're paying attention to the wrong things. He goes on to say that they love the most important seats in the synagogues. So in church, they love to be up front. They love to be on the stage like me. They love to be greeted in the right way. Oh, pastor, oh yes, elder, oh yes. They love these greetings. Jesus is not saying that the greetings are wrong or that it's really even important where they sit in church. What he's saying is that by loving those things, their energy is misplaced. They have put their time and effort into the wrong kinds of things. He finally says that they are like unmarked graves. And in this culture, if you walked over a grave, you were considered to be ritually unclean. And an unmarked grave is one that you don't know is a grave. And so you walk over it and you become unclean. Something bad happens to you without knowing it. And this is what the Pharisees were like, because they looked like they were doing well. They looked like upstanding religious leaders. And so when people were around them and influenced by them, they were influenced to put their time and energy into things that didn't matter that much, instead of the things that were really important. And they were led the wrong way by being around the Pharisees without even knowing it. Next, one of the teachers of the law, one of the pastors who preaches sermons, said to him, Jesus, when you say these things to the elders, these other leaders, you're insulting us too. And Jesus pretty much says, good, now let me tell you how I'm going to insult you. To these people, he says, you load people down with burdens. So when they were teaching the Bible, they were teaching primarily rules instead of teaching the love of God, and then not helping people to actually follow them. He says that they build tombs for the prophets. So the prophets had consistently come along and said, you got to refocus on God himself instead of paying attention just to all this stuff that's around him. And when they did that, people would kill them eventually. And what he's saying is that these guys honor the prophets and say, oh yes, these prophets were great. But if the prophets were really there in real life, they would kill them too. It's just like they're about to kill Jesus. And finally, he says to them, you have taken away the key to knowledge. You have taken away the key to knowledge. You have not entered yourself, and you have prevented other people from entering. Now, these are the specific things that he hammers the religious leaders in his time for. And it's really easy for us, sitting here, to think, that stuff is really dumb. Why would they pay attention to all those things instead of paying attention to loving God? We would never pay attention to these things, would we? We wouldn't come up with, oh, we got the next one up there already. Sweet. We would never pay attention to these things. We would never pay attention to, building tombs for the prophets over actually doing what God says. We would never pay attention to particular rules of tithing more than we would to actually following God. But that's because these guys grew up this way, and we didn't. Think again about how this began. Remember the hand-washing incident. The hand-washing incident, the religious leaders, and the Jews, they would always wash their hands before they ate. And that was a powerful practice for them. I want you to think about what it would have been like to be a little Jewish boy or a little Jewish girl growing up in a household that really honored God. And one of the things you did, and you felt so connected to God and so proud when you did this, you would wash your hands every time you ate, because you were the people of God, because you were honoring God. This was something that was really coming from your heart. The Pharisees had begun stuff like this. They were a renewal movement, the Pharisees. They had begun stuff like this a long time before as a real act of serving God and worshiping him. But then over time, it became more about the practice than about really honoring God from their hearts. And they tried to force everybody to have the same practice. It's easy for us to say that those particular things are not our problem because we grew up in a different place. Now give me the next slide. Here's a few things for you to consider that are a little bit closer to home. Here are some things that churches in the 20th century, the 20th century is long gone now. It is long gone. But these are some things that churches in the 20th century spent a lot of time on. Not every church, but look at some of these things. The organ or the guitar. Now let's fight about it. I mean, in the 20th century, this was a huge thing. People who had grown up worshiping God with organ music felt like the guitar was dishonoring to God. And people who were younger and had grown up with rock music felt like the organ was boring. And how could you really worship God with something that's boring? Are you kidding me? But all of this stuff is on the surface. What version of the Bible should we read? This was a big fight. Some places, there's still churches that think King James Version only. You know what the first followers of Jesus did when they wrote the Bible? Did they speak Greek as their first language? Everybody say no. They wrote the Bible in a different language than they normally spoke. Why? So it could be spread to everyone who didn't already know it. They did not hold to the particular form that they had grown up with because it's more about the mission than it is about the form. And look at this one. Should we drink beer? That was a big fight, right? The Bible doesn't say it's wrong to drink alcohol. It says it's wrong to get drunk. Absolutely wrong to get drunk. But in the 20th century, we won't get into all the details of that, but that was a big fight as well. Now let's come even closer to home. Let's talk about things that I've heard at Community of Hope Church in the last year. Now, I'm not saying here, again, remember, Jesus is not saying which way is right or wrong on these. What he's saying is that these kinds of things are not where you should be putting your energy. He's saying that if this is where we put most of our energy, we will be like blind people who go the wrong way. That's what he's saying. He's not even weighing in on which way is right or wrong. Should we wear hats in church when we worship? Should we wear hats in church when we worship? Some people who've grown up in a culture where taking off your hat was a sign of honoring God, just like the hand washing was a sign of honoring God, feel like when they see somebody wearing a hat, they feel like that's dishonoring to God. But some people who've grown up in a different culture feel like I'm presenting my real self when I come and I wear a hat. What is Jesus saying? Is Jesus saying wear hats, don't wear hats? Jesus is saying put your energy in the right place. Next, which songs should we sing and how loud should they be? Does Jesus weigh in on this? Does it say in the New Testament which kinds of songs we should sing in church? Does it say how loud the music should be? No, it does not. Why? Because that's not the most important thing. Is this totally unimportant? No, it's not totally unimportant. So I'm not even saying we shouldn't talk about these things. What I'm saying is this cannot be where our primary energy goes. If this is where most of our energy and discussion and effort goes, we lose. We fall into the blind pit. If our energy is primarily focused on loving God, everything will turn out, even if we make the wrong decisions sometimes on some of these. And finally, how should you be baptized? This has been a stumbling block for a few people. Community of Hope, we baptize people a little bit differently than some other churches. There's a whole bunch of different ways of baptizing. Does the Bible say exactly how you should baptize someone? Does it say you must do it 3 times or you must only do it once? No, it doesn't. Why doesn't it say that? Could Jesus have had that written in the Bible? Could he have made that part of the Bible? This is how you baptize. First you say this, and then you say this, and then you dunk this many times. The water must be this temperature. He could have done that. He did not. Why? Next slide. This is a quote from a writer I really like, Dallas Willard. Why does the New Testament say nothing about all those matters to which the usual congregation, the usual church today, devotes almost all of its thought and effort? Because those matters are not primary. And if you want to have the fire inside of you lit so that you can really see life, what Jesus is saying, go to the next slide. This is just back to our main point. What Jesus is saying is this. We're almost done. Band can come up. What Jesus is saying is this. You must direct your time and energy. You must direct the vast majority of your time and energy at the things that are most important. At truly knowing God on the inside. At really changing on the inside. and at actually joining the mission that Jesus is on. If you do this, you will eventually get to the right place by God's power. If you do not, you will be the blind leading the blind, and you will fall into a pit. And so I just want to leave you with two questions as we finish. Two questions to think about this week. What did Jesus spend most of his time and energy focused on? And now you, what do you spend most of your time and energy focused on? Let's continue in worship.